Round like a circle in a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind.
Visit StogieGeeks.com/Debonaire for a list of retailers who carry Debonaire cigars. Buy some today and get a little more Debonaire. Welcome back, everyone, to the Stogie Geeks Show. This is our Debonaire Ideal segment for this evening. I want to thank Phil Zangi and the rest of the team at Debonaire Cigars for sponsoring the show for so long. They've been a long-time sponsor of the show. We thank you for your support. They make and speaking of cigars that I buy and then put away, we were just talking about that during the break. I was telling Big Pete, who's here in the live audience, who's here pretty much every Thursday, or not Monday and sometimes Thursday, that the EP Carrillo releases, and Debonaire falls into this category too. I'll just buy the 10-count special boxes of them. Debonaire Salamones, the Debonaire Maduro in the A size. And I'll just put them away in my humidor. And I did a big cleaning out of my humidor, Will. I found a box of EP Carrillo 2010s, 2011, 2012, 2013. I think I have a box each of those with about 8 cigars in each one. Same thing with the Debonaire Salamone and same thing with the Debonaire A size. I just keep those, they're there.
They're there.
They're there. Just aging. Just getting better with age, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to that A, the 33rd degree. I think it's the best A cigar ever made. And I know Phil's a sponsor, but I'm not ashamed to say it.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
We're going to take a look back. And we've done 200 episodes of Stogie Geeks, Will.
Yep.
And it's kind of interesting. When I started thinking about it, and I was thinking about this all week since we have our production meetings almost sometimes a week before the show or at a regular interval. And I've been thinking about what we want to do looking back. We're going to look forward to, because I hate just looking back. But in my looking back, I've thought about, to me, the brands that have really stuck out to me and inspired me to do the show.
Yeah.
And that's really what kind of came to my mind when I talked about looking back. And in those brands, the one that I'll mention first is Paul Gamarian. And
you got that one too.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Paul Gamarian, and it's awesome because we have to get someone from Paul Gamarian on the show.
We may have you know what? We have a connection. I'll talk to you offline about that. We may be making some progress with that.
I want nothing more than to talk to someone in the Gamarian family, if not all of them, because I have the utmost respect for them in terms of just the whole experience of being exposed to the brand and smoking their cigars. And it was one of those cigars that going to Mr. J. Savannah Smoke Shop even before we started the Stogie Geek show, it was one of those brands I was like, wow, this is so good. I wish more people would smoke this. I wish more people were talking about this, because there's a lot of brands that people are talking about, and don't get me wrong, they're awesome, but I'm like, here's a cigar that it's not brought up in everyday conversation with casual cigar smokers, even some cigar enthusiasts, but when you mention it and you recommend it to someone, I want to say, Will, 100% of the time, they come back and they're like, wow, thank you so much for mentioning that. I found this Paul Gamarian cigar, and they're awesome.
Yeah.
And you can't say that about every brand, Will. And they, to me, are one of the few with, that 100% track record that when you gift someone or recommend this brand, people are just really excited about it and are very positive about it. And you can't say that about every brand. So.
No, in fact, being that I was a Stogie Geeks listener, viewer before joining the show, this was a brand I learned about from your show. And I didn't understand everything about this brand, and then I really got exposed to some of the work being done in here, and it's I I, I think we're really the only podcast that's done Paul Gamarian, and I can think of only maybe 3 websites total that cover Paul Gamarian to any extent. I think we're one of the 3. So yeah, I mean it's and they're more East Coast. They're found more in the East Coast.
Yeah.
But this is quality, and they made it Davidoff, so it's quality stuff.
It's very quality stuff. It ages well. We've talked. I mean, go into our Stogie Geeks feed and look for Paul Gamarian and seek some out. And you can find them. You can find them online. You can find them in brick and mortar. Seek some out, and I guarantee you will be. And not to say that everyone is a home run, but they've got a pretty expansive line.
Yeah,
and you will find something you like to smoke in the Paul Gamarian. So,
I mean, I'll say this. I have to get some more of the 25ths. I know Atlantic's got them, but the 25th came out late last year, and it's one of the best cigars I've had. This particular, I think it's so, and it is. This is a company that's been around 25 years, and they're doing just great cigars.
I would say Camacho's another brand that I put in there too. The original Camacho. It's kind of interesting. And that definitely stems from Mrs. J's Havana Smoke Shop, carrying Camacho for so long. And another local shop here. It kind of made me realize that even, a brand that's been around so long, we all talk about the latest hot thing. Camacho was a brand that just consistently produced great cigars that aged well. And even when you break out of some of the local shops that we've talked about on the show, Will, Camacho's made some awesome cigars over time. And I remember specifically there was like a Camacho 1105 that was ridiculously old that I smoked. And I'm like, wow, like it's one of the ones that made me realize like, wow, there's really something to this whole cigar smoking hobby that is just so different and gets me so excited about just the whole experience. And Camacho was certainly one of those brands.
We did episode 150. We had Christian Aroa on. And I remember we were kind of prepping for the interview with Christian a couple minutes before, and you asked him, "Hey, Christian, I know you're with CLE, but can we talk about some of this old Camacho stuff?"
Yeah.
And he was great because he said, "Hey, that's a part of my history. That's a part of what my family did. Of course I will." And he was very, very generous with the time to talk about some of those cigars for a company that's, it's not his company anymore. So,
right.
But I thought that was really good when he did that in episode 150.
And that's one of the reasons why, just one reason why I was so excited when we interviewed Christian was to talk about that history, because it's one of the things that really, it motivated me to go ahead and create a show because it generated so much excitement about the product, about this experience, about the flavors, about all those things that I just know and loved about Camacho. So
absolutely.
I also think that Arturo Fuente, certainly, which we've talked about on the show before, and everyone knows me as kind of like the Opus X smoker, and we've talked a lot about Opus X, and it was really some of those early relationships, especially with Mark Jr., that really fueled my love for the Fuente line, because I would trade with him, I would buy stuff from him. He inherited a humidor from his former father-in-law, who had unfortunately passed away, and had a lot of really old Fuente, including Opus X, and it just like reaffirmed my love for that blend and the way they would age. And it certainly, people kind of poke fun at how much I love and talk about Opus X, but I really love that as a blend, specifically because you can put that in your humidor, and for a lot of the sizes, you got to wait like 3 years before you really get a different experience from that blend. And to have that patience with something like that was important for me, to show patience and have patience in things that you age. I always liken that to like wine and other things, but to do that with cigars, Fuente and the Opus X specifically was one that really kind of turned me on to that whole aging experience. And I'm so glad they have continued and still produce that to this day. Some sizes smoke great out of the box. Other ones you can age for 3 years. Others you can age for longer. Like, just to have that experience is a lot of fun. It's given us a lot of talking points over the years in the past 200 episodes, Will. All the different sizes, all the different, kind of offshoots from Opus X, the different blends, like Lost City, which isn't an Opus X blend, right? But it's another one from Fuente. The Añejo series, which I have appreciated over time as well. It's just, they're iconic in the Stogie Geeks history. I remember vividly, like, Mark Jr. smoking that cigar on the bottle and just being lost in it. So a lot of the history is because we've enjoyed a lot of the different Opus X cigars,
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the experience we had with the Siglo de Amores
Mm-hmm.
as well. Fuente, here's the thing about Fuente. Sometimes they don't get a lot of coverage in the written media because they're a tough brand to cover. They don't disclose a lot of information. They don't talk a lot with the media. Doesn't mean they're bad people at all. It's just what they choose to do. But when it comes to a podcast, they're a great brand to talk about because of all the points you just made. How, these cigars, they age, there's all these, permutations, these limiteds, and obviously quality smokes. And I think it makes for great podcast talk
Mm-hmm.
with a brand, possibly as good as any other brand.
It's interesting. One of the stories we've told in Stogie Geeks past is about the Davidoff Millennium Blend. And I'll go kind of full disclosure. Mr. J's Havana Smoke Shop had a box of Robustos in the Davidoff Millennium. And I went to them. I said, I've done all, and we've talked about this on the show in the past. Like, I've done all this research, and Davidoff Millennium is one of the blends that comes, up on my radar because I've read all the stuff about them. And they were very appreciative that I put the time in to do the research to determine which cigar that I wanted to smoke. And we've always said that when we've done segments in the past, Will, about like how you approach your retailer and how brick and mortar stores are awesome. And then if you maybe haven't been in there or been an infrequent visitor, but you say, hey, look, like, I've done all this research, I've read all this stuff, and I really want to try this based on my research. Like, I put the time in to do this, and they had this epic box of Davidoff Millenniums Robustos. I don't know what year it was from. It might have been early 2000s. And Will, these were like epic cigars. And they were just awesome cigars. And it kind of, that was one of the cigars too that really reinforced my enthusiasm for the hobby of smoking cigars.
Yep.
Was having these aged Davidoff Millennium Robustos, and just the smoking experience you got from them, the flavor was just off the charts. And I just kind of, and looking back in our own history, and even recently, Davidoff is still producing cigars that are just like amazing. So I think it's an important part of the Stogie Geeks past as well.
They really are. And we talk about the other one is Avo. I mean, in there too. I'm smoking my Avo LE10 right now, which is, it's still a go-to cigar as much as these. I'm going to run out of these eventually, but yeah, I mean, there's just some incredible stuff that's been done in that line as well.
And let's not forget, we've talked about a lot of larger manufacturers, so to speak, with Fuente and Davidoff. Will, the boutiques are definitely ones we can't forget that definitely fuel our show. And really two come to mind. And Tatuaje is one where they've had so many awesome releases and so many limited releases that have come back and really lived up to the name. You look at Tatuaje Nueva Reserva. You look at the Tatuaje RC series, which doesn't get a lot of play. But when Stogie Santa ever gifted me the Tatuaje, it wasn't the 233. What's the shorter size in that blend?
I want to do our new spot.
Google that. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm blanking on that.
Me too.
184?
184.
He gave me one of these 184s from the first release of 184s, and I was like, this is a thing that I got to get into, right? Like this cigar is awesome. And then they re-released it, and I'm like, this cigar's still awesome. And that's one of the things that, for a lot of manufacturers that I love, it's one of the redeeming qualities is that they can have an awesome first release and then wait so much time and re-release it and have it be equally as awesome. 184 fits in that category. And to have it be something that, I mean, how many podcasts and blogs do you know that talk about RC 184?
Not lately.
Yeah, not lately.
Not lately. I think years ago, you go back 7, 8 years ago, they probably were, but not lately. I mean, we've talked about that a lot.
It's one of the like iconic blends in the entire industry, and Tatuai has had so many. Also, Andre Farkas of Viaje, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
what was his original Skull and Bones released?
The Daisy Cutter.
The Daisy Cutter.
Which he was
Stogie
kind
Santa
of
was so excited about that, and I tell you what, he was so excited to the point that when he gave me my first Daisy Cutter, I was tickled pink. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I'm smoking the Daisy Cutter. And I'm like, you know what? It lived up to every expectation that I had of that cigar. And it was, again, like, to be part of experiences like that caused me to want to do 200 and do 200 more episodes of this show, is to have experiences like that with people and with cigars. I really think is what it boils down to.
Yeah, and that cigar, I think, was probably, there was a couple of cigars that launched Andre, but I think that was one of them. The other one was obviously the one he got the aficionado rating on the Oro, but that one really, and he hasn't ever re-released. He's talking about possibly re-releasing it, but he hasn't ever re-released that cigar.
And props to Andre, who's been on the show twice in the past, which is
three times,
which is
Yes.
great to have some people like that in the industry that have made cigars that basically fueled our enthusiasm and drive to keep going and to create the show and then keep going to make it 200 episodes. To be able to sit down and talk with these people is just an amazing opportunity for us. And I think to transition to looking forward, to continue to do that is one of the reasons why I love doing the Stogie Geek show, is to find these cigars and these releases that not always are limited, right? And there's certainly regular production that get us just as excited. We talk about EP Carrillo. One of my favorite cigars is that New Wave Reserva Toro. Like,
Right.
To find those things is really what keeps us going, and to look into the future to see what's going to be released or what's being released right now is equally as exciting. I mean, we're so excited about all the releases that came out at IBCPR. Like, that's the stuff that fuels the show.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen, there's been a lot of stuff to come out. And we could talk. My concerns are, obviously, I'm worried about demand keeping up. Demand is not keeping up with the supply. So, there's going to be excess supply. It's actually a good thing. It's actually a good thing with that. But given that there's a bigger supply, there's a bigger lot of better cigars out there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way to look at that, So what I've seen come out this year has been some really, really good stuff. And we talked about several of them, in the Stogies of the Week beforehand, So I think the next 2 years is going to be healthy for what we're going to see come out. I'm a little concerned after 2 years, but I think we got to let's get through the next 2 years and see where that's going to lead.
I am a little concerned about, once that 2-year mark passes, how FDA impacts the industry. Well, I think you're right. For the next 2 years, it's business as usual, as we've described, but
somewhat. But yeah.
I mean, there are some more restrictions, but somewhat. But after that is really what concerns me. I don't want to see it all kind of shift towards, as regulation has proven in other industries, I don't want to see it shift towards just big companies. And don't get me wrong, big companies are producing great cigars, but there's a lot of smaller production cigar companies that I don't want to see impacted by these regulations. That's my primary concern.
I really think, though, with Europe, I think Europe may be very interesting to watch over the next couple of years. And there may be a lot of good stuff. We may end up seeing the emergence of a new gray market. Now, I remember when we had Rene Castaneda from Villiger on, he said, Europe's got its regulations too.
Mm-hmm.
but also they're more cost effective also in terms of
Yeah.
it doesn't cost as much. So I think you're going to see we may end up seeing some of these diamonds in the rough start to go to Europe, and this gray market is going to be interesting to see. It may
Well,
create a whole new chase for stuff. It may create a whole
yeah,
new chase.
but that's the thing, Will. Like, I've always seen a gray market with Cuban cigars, which we haven't talked about as fueling this show. It's always fueled this show.
It has. I mean, it's something that I ignored with Cigar Coop really till I came on the show. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, and I
And-
think we're starting to bring it around, and you
Oh,
went to Cuba, which
I'm just
fuel-
smoked a Bajica. Yeah,
and I think that we're going to see more of that. And I think when like Tim and Stogie Santa and Mark Jr. were on the show, they had already in their collections a lot of Cuban cigars that we talked about on the show, and I thought that was good. And I think that's going to continue, and I think the gray market is going to continue with these cigars, and it may even expand as we see more regulation. However, I'm kind of hopeful that it was one of the things that we broke, I think, on this show that set us apart from any other show in the industry is that in other situations where FDA has gotten involved, there are lobbyist groups that kind of fight for the smaller players in the industry to make sure that just not the bigger players survive. And in the U.S., at least, there's always been regulations to make sure there's not a monopoly. And I think FDA is somewhat limited by that. I hope that prevails in cigars so that just the larger manufacturers that can deal with regulation aren't the ones that survive. And I truly believe that I hope, the optimist in me hopes that continues, right? And I don't want to see it all go to gray market. I want to see a fair market in terms of monopolies and in terms of regulation as well.
I agree. I mean, there's going to be some consolidation. There's no question about it. I think the consolidation is going to take about 10 years, though. I don't think you're going to see it in 2 years. I heard. I've heard some people. I've had some debate on that, but I think it's going to be about 10 years.
So this is like from a totally different perspective outside of cigars. I'm okay with consolidation.
Me too.
Because inevitably what happens is some companies get really big and they realize it's really difficult to innovate when you're really big. So they kind of dip back into that smaller company kind of feel of people who are innovating. So I think innovation will always play a part in any industry because if you look at technology, sure, big companies like Microsoft, it's more difficult to innovate because it's such a big company. But what they do, Will, is they create programs for startups so they can stay involved with that innovative culture and bring that into their product. And I think you're going to see the same thing in cigars. And they don't want to get in the way of the 5 to 10 person teams that are like, look, we can create something awesome. And they're going to want that to flourish because the 5 or 10 person teams can do that so much better than the thousands and thousands of people that work for these big companies. So I hope that culture kind of prevails in the cigars such that the smaller people who want to just create their own blends can do the innovative stuff and still bring that to market.
We didn't mention Drew Estate, and we really should. And they're a long sponsor of our show as well. But it's almost 2 years since they got acquired from Swisher. And to be honest with you, they are very much still operating like Drew Estate.
And that's what big companies want, right?
Yeah, they're operating.
Not all big companies. And some big companies acquire. Let's go to the Cisco example, Will. I mean, you work for a big company too, right?
Right.
Like
right.
Cisco will typically acquire people and try and bring them into the fold, and then they lose that culture, they lose that innovative spirit. But the companies that do it right will acquire those companies and still let them be innovative and creative. And I truly believe that Swisher has done the same thing with Drew Estate. We've seen a lot of great blends come out of Drew Estate, both on the premium cigar, traditional cigar market, and on the infused side, which is something that I think is a different conversation in terms of our history on Stogie Geeks, in that we want to review every cigar as a cigar, whether it's infused or not. I think Drew Estate has led the market in infused cigars and one of the few, probably one of two. I think between them and Oliva, they produce a few cigars that, as the Stogie Geek in me, I
Build
love
up.
to smoke.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you look, again, Drew Estate, Jonathan said it on the show that Swisher acquired them for their core competencies in premium cigars. Same thing I think that happened with Jay Cortez acquiring Oliva
Right.
for those core competencies. And I'll tell you what, Drew Estate, they just came out with that. We talked about it on Stogie Geeks News last week. That small batch release out of El Titan de Bronze they just came out with. They have a small batch release they're doing with Caldwell. They're still very much. We use the word agile in software development. They're being very agile, lean and mean to do that. And I think they've done very, very well with that. Now Phil Zengi's a part of that group as well, and so they're moving forward.
And the innovation is one of the things I love about cigars. Being from a technology background, I love to see all the new blends, all the different things. We've talked about so many cigars on the show wheel that are, there's a Candela wrapper. There's what was the one you talked about on the news? The seed regeneration. Is that what it's called?
The seed regeneration, where they actually
That's
were
awesome.
taking vintage seeds, they're regrowing them, and they're growing them in different regions to
I
try
love
to
I love
expand.
science. Science is awesome, right? It's the
Right.
foundation for all those like new and creative things that are happening, and that needs to continue in cigars. And I hope FDA doesn't like squash that altogether. I'm really optimistic that we're still able to do that as an industry.
Yeah, the thing is, when you look at Davidoff, right, and one reason why I love doing the interview every year at IPCPR with Hans Christian is because when he came in, his mantra was innovation, and he was going to build the whole company around an innovation theme. And Davidoff in the last 5 years has just done things that Davidoff was very much Davidoff for maybe
Yeah.
100 years, 120 years. He comes in there. He still keeps very much to the core principles of Davidoff, but he's done things that just you wouldn't expect Davidoff to. This Yamasa release, the tobaccos they're growing there are in a region that would have never been able to handle growing tobacco, but they saw something, I guess, whatever was in this region, that if they can tweak it a bit, changing some of the pH levels of the soil, they can get some really good tobacco. And forward thinking for thinking of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean that's what motivates Will and myself and the others here at Stogie Geeks to keep going,
Yeah.
and talk about what's new. It is it's interesting how that we draw parallels from technology, right? Like we're always going to keep innovating and talk about what's innovating in this industry. So that's really cool.
And we have an open mind on that for a reason. And I think that's what, and not everyone's always going to agree with it, but I'm confident that's why we're going to do another 200 shows because I think we've been able to do that to the table. Hopefully our audience appreciates it. I mean,
Well, and that's one thing too, Will. Like we've always smoked everything here on the Stogie Geek Show, and I think it's bring up a great point in that any premium hand rolled cigar we're going to smoke. It doesn't matter who makes it. It doesn't matter what tobacco they use. It doesn't matter what method they use. We want to try it, and we want to give it a fair review. And that's one of the founding principles of the Stogie Geek Show is that it doesn't matter.
doesn't matter.
It's a cigar. We're going to smoke it. We're going to tell you what we think of it. And it allows you as the listener, subscriber, to form your own opinions and give you some facts about what you may want to try, and give you information about what's available on the market. And I think that's really important when it comes to cigars. And I hope even with FDA, even with all the things that are happening in the industry, that prevails no matter what. We're always going to give you that information you need to know about what cigar you want to try next.
Right. Exactly. And certainly, we've been challenged, and I think that's great when we're challenged too.
What are you most interested? There's so many cigars that I'm looking forward to smoking. What's kind of on your list, Will?
That's an interesting one. In terms of what obviously I'm really looking forward to that Fuente 20-year anniversary cigar that's coming out. I mean, that was something very high. J.C. Newman's got that whole fourth generation line, which is going to be focused a lot around the American tobacco. So I'm really curious to see what they're gonna do with that. I'm waiting for Tatawahe, the new Verite.
Nice. Yep.
They showed it at the show. It's surprising. That was kind of one of the didn't get a lot of buzz, but I think that's because they didn't really have any product yet with that. I think it was very limited what they had for FDA. But so I'm really looking forward to that because it's been 6 years since we've had a Verite. So I mean, EP Carrillo's restructured the portfolio from top to bottom, and there's a lot I haven't smoked in that line yet, and that was in the new portfolio that I want to check out.
Yeah, I think it's exciting for me for any small manufacturer or large manufacturer when they come out with new blends to try them, and I think that's no matter what the opposition is, I'm excited to see what people come up with and try that. And I know that no matter what the FDA or anyone is going to try and limit us, that there's going to be new stuff available, and it's exciting for me to try it.
Agree.
Well, cool. Well, that's our Debonaire Ideal segment for this evening. Right now, we're going to transition into an interview. And I have to say, Will, I had kind of this personal connection to Abe Flores that was not expected. Abe kind of walked in and looked at all of our technology here in the studio, and him and I got talking. And it turns out we're from similar backgrounds, and that definitely showed during the interview, and Abe and I had a great conversation, and I'm excited to bring that to our Stogie Geeks listeners and let them view and listen to that for the first time. So,
yeah, so Abe Flores is the man behind PDR Cigars. He's becoming a real power in the business right now. He doesn't do a lot of interviews, and he doesn't do a lot of in-person interviews. This is an in-depth interview. I think folks are really going to enjoy it. I was thrilled to have that interview. The funny thing is, I knew about Abe's background, and it was only like when I was starting to do the show notes, I said, let me put something in there for Paul, because I completely forgot about that Abe's roots were in technology. And he'll tell that story really well, I think.
Yeah, it was a great interview. So that interview coming up next on Stogie Geeks, episode 200.